Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am now live again. Happy days. We're trying out a new camera angle, so apologies if you think it's a little bit unusual. There may be an incidence where you're now looking right at my nose instead of down at the rapidly thinning hair. So apologies in advance for that. You guess you get to sort of pick your poison. But one of the interesting thing about how we're trying with this new tripod is that my hands are huge. Look at that. Look at those hands. And my head is like a tiny little pin. But that's okay. We can deal with that. I just thought, it was a little bit of a different thing. And anyway, who cares? So you might notice that it's very cold here. So I'm wearing my dressing gown. Now, I was recently talking to some people on my sprint writing group, and they were a little bit confused by what I was talking about when I said that I was wearing a jumper and a dressing gown because it was so cold. Apparently they were picturing me in some sort of prom dress or something, so I had to explain that this what you guys over the pond call a robe, and what you would call a sweater is what I'm typically wearing. No sweater today though, because I'm wearing my excrementous worker t-shirt from the Mark Dawson self-publishing formula. It's I won't explain the meaning of it, but there's a worker there who's shoveling a big pile of shit, and that's me.
Yes, the t-shirt is still back to front.
I'm very happy about it. Oh yes, apologies guys.
Back to front.
We haven't managed it. We can't sort the back to front issue because I'm using the selfie camera on my phone, and the reasons for that is firstly it makes me look pretty. And also because if the phone's the other way around, so you get it all properly, I can't touch the buttons to press go and stuff, and I can't see how pretty they look. So yeah, unfortunately you're going to have to put up with things being back to back, which is very difficult if you're lip reading, because I'm presumably like lip reading left to right instead of right to left as well. I don't know if that affects you or not. No.
Wow, it's 30 degrees in parts of Europe.
Anyway, so I am today going to be reading a little bit again from Can I Kiss Her Yet? And this time we're going to go about the weddings. So I'm going to do the actual bit of the wedding itself. I'm just going to read through that. We'll just see how far we get. There's a few things, for those of you who read the book, was a few bits and bats did go wrong with the process around our wedding. So yeah, so you'll never would have seen that coming, would you? So yeah, so you get the actual the most important part, the pivotal part, the wedding part of the wedding book, and after that, because the rest of the book's got all sorts of interesting stuff, but it's mostly about a big road trip we did around the UK, and it's cool and everything, but I don't think that's sort of quite as like front page news. So we will skip next week on to Shave My Spider, which is the Asia book, and we'll go on from there, and we'll do a few readings from that because there's loads of good stuff in there, and that's a massive book.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have a quick sip of my brew.
You'll have to read out your mug because.
Oh, I broke my Thor mug, which I was very obsessed about. Yes, he was quite Thor after a tumble on the floor. So we got this. It's a psychic mug with the prediction, and the crystal ball says, "You will spill this." And I was like, "Oh my god!" It's like the mug knows me, because like I spill pretty much every cup of tea or coffee I ever pick up. So often more than once.
This is also true.
As evidenced by the fact that the cup is covered in spill marks. Anyway, right. So that taken care of, let's get down to reading. And I won't do it in a silly voice like this.
But you could.
Or will I?
You could do.
Yeah. So I'll read you as I read through this, because I'm not going to read the entire setup. There'll be some situations which will be a bit like, huh? And there'll be loads of names of guests thrown at you, just random friends of mine and friends of Rue's and family members that showed up. I can either stop each time and explain who they were, or we can just gloss over that. And I think I'll just gloss over it, because if I stop each time and be like, oh, and this is actually a second cousin twice removed who came from Denmark, and you put live badges down his trousers, then that's just going to really, really screw with the flow of things.
You have some weird family members.
Alright, so we'll crack straight on. I'm going to set the scene a little bit. So we're going to start with the last minute preparations before the wedding. And basically we'll read until Rue throws something, which
could be soon, could be later.
It's shortly after 2 a.m. here, so patience is minimal. So you won't have to suffer long,
You're
I
5
promise.
minutes in and you haven't read a chapter yet.
Okay, here we go. Last minute preparations. When we arrived in Taunton, the first thing I did was haul the giant chunk of tree trunk out of our car. It took 3 of us to carry it up the stairs into the secret garden. Jokes were made about the size of my wood, which helped ease the pain of the splinters in our arms. When it was set on the legs from the iron bird bath, against the backdrop of conifer trees, it made the perfect altar. I added a few items to the top of it, an exquisite piece of black granite from Mum's rock collection, symbolising the earth, a candle for fire, a small bowl of water, and some incense, which is generally used to signify air. With the elements represented, the altar was done for now. Draped with a few flowers and a few bits of ivy, hopefully it wouldn't trigger any accusations of Satanism from the more religious of our guests. The chairs had been set out exactly as I'd requested, which was a relief. Beyond that, there was nothing to detract from the area's natural, timeless state. I set up one of the empty chairs in honour of Rue's mum, Frida, with flowers and a framed picture of her and a frog ornament in the grass underneath it, as she'd had a lifelong love of frogs. Making this little tribute had been an easy decision for us. We wanted to feel like Frida was with us at the ceremony, and it was a happy choice to include her. Likewise, we invited the spirit of Rue's cousin Petra to attend, a talented artist. She'd been killed recently in a car crash. Otherwise, she'd have been here with the rest of the Dutch delegation. As Petra's obsession was with butterflies, we'd bought some decorative ones online and we hung them from the trees here and there around the garden. Standing in front of the altar, surveying the scene, I felt a ripple of anticipation run through me like an electric current. This was it. In a couple of hours, I'd be stood here for real, exchanging the vows I'd printed on 2 small parchment scrolls. I hadn't read Rue's, of course. She'd taken over the computer to print hers, so that particular piece of magic would only be revealed when the time was right. It was all coming together, so perfectly I could have cried, if I'd had time. But I had more pressing concerns. The last pile of stuff in the car was for the Winchester pub, where we were having our what do you call it after? Reception. And it was vital it be delivered. A laptop containing the music for the entire evening, which still had to be tested with their speaker system, plus party favours, candles, guest books and last minute instructions for the owner Kaz. As I turned to leave the garden, I noticed something really special. A brilliant coloured butterfly was doing a dance right above the altar. I had to smile. Thinking about it, there were 3 distinct possibilities. 1, it was just a butterfly. This was, after all, a garden. 2, it was fate. A tiny portion of Petra's spirit had come to watch us get married. Or 3, it was sexually attracted to the numerous plastic butterflies we'd scattered liberally around the place, in which case it was in for a long and frustrating day. All was well at the Winchester. Kaz had made a clean sweep of the place and it looked gorgeous. Gleaming wood, glowing brass, pristine white tablecloths on the heavy oak tables. Both my laptop and the backup iPod I'd bought connected easily into the pub's stereo system, so the music was a go. "Oh, but my chef's called in sick," Kaz said, "so I might need you to give me a hand later in the kitchen." "What? But what?" "It's alright, I'm only messing with you. Relax, it's your wedding day." "I can't relax because it's my wedding day. I've got too much to do." "Sounds like someone needs a double whiskey." "Bloody hell, good idea." With that taken care of, some of my other concerns seemed to melt away. I'd already accomplished almost everything on my list, and I still had some time to spare. I called the limo company to check they were on schedule, and the minibus company to check they were too. All was green. Thunderbirds are go. So I dispatched Jill and Chris to intercept any early arrivals, gathered my outfit from the back seat of the car, and headed into the Castle Hotel's ballroom to put it on. A million things were running through my mind. Would my cousin at the Days Inn be able to get all the guests on the minibus? Would they be too late and delay the ceremony? Or too early and be bored? I got a last-minute text message from one of my friends saying she wouldn't be able to make it. Her car had exploded on the motorway and she was now sitting in a field waiting for the RAC. She attached a picture of her and her boyfriend. Both were dressed in full-on Robin Hood costumes that they'd made specially. She was understandably gutted, as was I. The party wouldn't be same without her. Was that it? All the day's bad luck falling on one unlucky pair? Or was some unnamed disaster still lurking in the wings? A catastrophic change in weather? An accident? A timing error? Or something I'd completely forgotten to buy or plan or organise? I was starting to go a bit crazy, so I nipped back to the Winchester for another dose of medicine. After that, the inside of my head seemed much calmer. Everything was ready. Everything was in motion. It was too late now to worry about what might have been missed, as there was nothing I could do to fix it. Time to kick back and go with the flow. All I had to do was wait for the photographer, who would be taking pictures of me getting dressed for the ceremony. I wasn't sure why, but apparently that was considered appropriate. While I waited, I had a look around. If the weather had gone against us, this would have been the room we'd get married in. It would have swallowed our crowd easily enough, and it certainly looked the part, an elegant room, albeit fading here and there in its grandeur. There were easily 100 chairs in there, with space for 100 more. Those would be the ones that now lined the secret garden outside. It must have taken ages to carry them all out. A bank of double-height windows ran down one wall, lined with voluminous velvet curtains. I hastily pulled them all closed. It was slightly unnerving wandering around such a massive and elaborate room in my underwear. From the huge entry doors, I heard the softest, tiniest, barest minimum of a knock. That knock could only come from one person, Sally, my best friend from my student days. With her would be Chris, and they would both be wearing head-to-toe black, just like I did back then. The three of us had been so tight throughout university it bordered on incestuous. As I got to the door, sure enough, I heard Chris's sing-song Welsh voice on the other side asking, "Are you sure this is the right place?" I flung open the door to greet my friends, bellowing, "Hello!" The pair of them stood there, looking shocked. Sally cast a critical eye up and down me, which is when it occurred to me that I was still wearing nothing but my underpants. "Yep, this is the right place," she said. The photographer wasn't far behind, which saved me having to explain my indecency. Actually, I didn't even try. Both Chris and Sally had seen me in far worse and far more compromising situations. To be honest, I think they were more surprised that I'd shaved than they were at my semi-nudity. The photographer explained that, whilst shots of the bride in her boudoir were often considered artful and elegant, photographs of me wearing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle boxing shorts didn't quite fall into the same category. So I was allowed to dress myself after all, and the others hovered at a safe distance until I was decent. Donning my boots, however, required teamwork and cooperation. I sat in a chair and pushed one way, while Sally knelt on the floor and pushed the other. The photographer snapped away, and Chris provided a helpful running commentary of our progress, which came to an abrupt halt when I got an agonising cramp halfway through, straightening my legs so fast I nearly kicked Sally far across the room, then hopping round, shrieking like I'd stood in a puddle of molten lava. Oh, those boots were a bugger. I'd been over the moon when I'd won them on eBay. They were the most expensive part of my outfit, and the bit I'd been most excited about. They were knee-high black leather riding boots, exactly the kind any self-respecting medieval squire would have worn. And I'm not admitting that influenced my decision anyway, but they were also worn by Han Solo in Star Wars. I specifically wanted the kind that didn't have a continuous zip running all the way up them, as they had to be the genuine article. I was fully intending on adding them to my regular wardrobe, hoping that they'd look funky and unusual when worn with jeans and a jacket. Only now I was having second thoughts about that part. You know, the wearing them all the time in real life part, because it took nearly half an hour to get the damn things on. Then, finally bedecked in all my wedding finery, I stood up to show it off. It wasn't the most successful experiment. Between the tightness of the trousers and the inflexibility of the boots, I could hardly move my legs. I looked like a two-pin plug. "Wow," Sally marvelled. "Those are really impressive. I know you like tight trousers, but you've outdone yourself there." "What? I don't like tight trousers." "Are you kidding? Tony, you were famous for it all through uni. You always wore super tight jeans. Everybody knew which way you were hanging on a daily basis. There were conversations about it." "What?" "You didn't know?" "No." "Oh, all right. Maybe this isn't the best time to get into it." "No, probably not. But anyway, interesting choice on the trousers. Can you actually walk in them?" "I'm not quite sure." Official vibes. I sent Sally and Chris off to mingle with the guests as they arrived in the garden. I armed them with a stack of paper cones and a bin bag full of tree blossoms each. "If anyone wants to throw something, give them this," I instructed. "Are we confiscating eggs and rotten tomatoes then?" asked Sally. "No, it's confetti, environmentally friendly confetti." She raised an eyebrow. "Where did you get it?" "My auntie's back garden. There might be some small stones and branches mixed in with it though, so try not to give those out." "Fair enough." Jill turned up to escort me over the road to the registry office where the rest of my family were waiting. It was a grand old building built in 1522 as a boys' grammar school. Ranks of carved stone window surrounds, narrow arched doorways and a miniature bell tower gave it the air of a medieval monastery. At one point, we'd given serious consideration to holding our main ceremony in the massive Tudor hall, which took up one entire wing of the building. Since finding our secret garden, however, we downscaled our ambitions and booked the cheapest, simplest room they had for weddings, the ever so slightly more humble-sounding small room. I arrived outside the registry office building just before Rue did. The gleaming white stretch limo swung smoothly around the corner, sliding to a halt beside the stone entry steps. Rue's window was down, and she was smiling out of it, looking for all the world like a princess about to bestow her royal wave on the people. The driver leapt out like his seat was on fire and started pulling people out of the limo. "Quick," he said, "we're on double yellow lines here." It was a fair point. Wedding chauffeur he may be, but he'd still get booked for illegal parking if the cops drove past. People piled out of the limo, crowding the stone steps leading up to the registry office. I knew how many people could fit inside that car because I'd booked it, but it was still quite amusing watching them pop out one after another like they were emerging from the TARDIS. Rue, her dad Gerrit, all 3 bridesmaids, Linda, her sister Irene, and of course, little 2-year-old daughter Saoirse had been crammed in there. As they assembled on the pavement, the sun came out in a flash of gold. Rue looked angelic. Her gown shone diaphanous in the light. Her tanned shoulders were glowing and her eyes seemed almost impossibly blue. In all our time together, I'd never seen her wearing makeup. Hairdresser Faye had outdone herself. She braided white roses into Rue's platinum blonde hair, teasing it into 1,000 delicate curls that cascaded down her back. Amazingly, she managed to do a similar job on all 3 bridesmaids, an epic feat given her timetable of less than half an hour apiece. In their matching gowns of woodland green, Rue's sisters were stunning. They looked alike under ordinary circumstances, but all dressed the same and clutching matching bouquets, they were almost identical. I clomped down the steps as fast as my boots would allow me and wrapped Rue in a makeup-ruining hug. "You look incredible," I told her. "Thanks, my love, so do you." "How are you feeling?" "A bit drunk," she confessed. "Do you know we got free champagne in the limo?" "No idea. It was kind of last minute. I know I got to choose between pink or white ribbons, though." As I said this, the driver was frantically ripping the pink bows off the car and dodging around traffic to fasten white ones in their place. "He's running late for his next job," Rue explained. "The motorway was hell." I watched him edging carefully down the side of his car. He reached the boot, opened it, and wrestled Saoirse's buggy out of it. That act of selfless heroism used up the last few minutes of my hire, and he vacated the double yellow lines at top speed. The photographer was busy now, trying to capture the ladies where they looked their best. Linda and Irene were wearing their wings, of which Rue was very jealous. She really wanted to get married in wings, but decided it might look like she wasn't taking the whole thing seriously enough. That was why she'd bought the 3-metre-long, faux fur-trimmed cloak. Not because it matched her outfit, but because she always wanted to use it for fancy dress parties afterwards. He was always thinking ahead, Rue was. Saoirse, in her tiny purple fairy costume, was absolutely gorgeous. She was literally bouncing with excitement, twirling and jumping and burying herself in the train of Rue's dress. "Look at her, she's going crazy," said Linda. "Too much champagne?" I asked. "Don't get me started. She wants to do everything that Mummy does." Oh God. After spending a year in Thailand with Linda, I knew her better than most. That's going to get really messy. Rue and I presented ourselves at the office window, and an auburn-haired lady came out to show us to the registrar. She took us upstairs through several sets of double doors, burrowing our way into the heart of what was essentially a government office building. We stopped at a door much like the others we'd passed. From outside, the small room was spectacularly unremarkable. "And you've chosen to have no music?" the clerk asked. "That's right, yes." "OK then, follow me, please." She led me into a small wood-panelled room. It was as luxuriously furnished and inviting as the average high school staff room. No expense had been spared in decorating the place for nuptial ceremonies. An otherwise empty bookcase along one wall contained a small vase of fake flowers. There were 2 rows of straight-back chairs for guests and witnesses, but only our immediate families had followed me in. Rue waited outside in the corridor, accompanied by her dad. There would still be a ceremonial entrance and a symbolic giving away, even though this was strictly a legislative procedure. When the family members were seated, I assumed my position in front of the registrar. She was wearing a wig. It felt a bit like being on trial, only for a crime I was still waiting to commit. "Are you sure you don't want any music playing?" asked the clerk. "We have some right here, only it'll be dead silent otherwise." What the hell, I thought. Suddenly, stood before that cheap wooden desk, the significance of the moment hit me. I might not consider this ceremony to be important, but the law did, and no matter what else happened afterwards, officially, this would still be the time and place of our marriage. Right now, the background noise was people trying to be quiet. Our small congregation were wriggling in their seats, coughing, sniffing and clearing their throats as their excitement ran full tilt into the sombre atmosphere of the chamber. Doors banged in the distance, and even the shifting of my weight produced an audible creak from the floorboards. As always at these moments, I felt an uncontrollable urge to fart. Chances were I wasn't the only one, and I really didn't want Rue to walk into that. Dearly beloved. Even the thought made my diaphragm quiver. The threat of hysterical giggles was rising. Okay then, I relented. Let's have a bit of music. Whatever they had on offer would be melodic and nondescript, certainly better than the alternative. Marvellous, said the clerk, and she scurried over to the stereo. Let's see what we've got on number 1. She pressed the button and unleashed a torrent of angry sound. Men were screaming in deep voices like the growl of an enraged beast, while guitars screeched in agony. It was some seriously heavy thrash metal, Slipknot perhaps, or Megadeth, an indecipherable assault of noise and violence. The clerk hit stop just as I was reaching up to put my hands over my ears. "Ooh, I'm terribly sorry," she said. "That won't do at all. I'll try the next one." Her fingers dropped to the next button down. It was an old-school stacking system with 3 separate CD decks on top of each other. Why is that CD even on there, I wondered? Who the hell gets married to that? People with no love for God, presumably. Then the clerk pressed play on the second CD deck, and once again I was staggered. Insanely fast rave music flowed through the speakers, a beat so rapid it could only be produced electronically. I don't know much about the speed, garage, house, trance music scene, as I spent most of my time in Thailand hiding from it, but this was definitely one of those. Techno? Happy hardcore? Your guess is as good as mine. Let's see what's on number 3, said the clerk, sounding confused. I couldn't believe it. This stereo system existed for exactly one reason: to provide music for people to get married to. I thought my wedding was alternative, but there must have been some pretty weird ceremonies in that room. Third time lucky, I thought, as the clerk's fingers hovered over the play button. There was a twang, another twang, and then a whole series of them. This music had a slower pace. There was no backing track. It wasn't guitar music. Was it about to develop into a country and western song? It had a bit of a redneck vibe. I'd heard it somewhere before, actually. It was dueling banjos. You have got to be kidding me. The clerk looked over at me, spreading her hands in apology. That's all there is, she shrugged. I shook my head in disbelief, but I was past caring. You know what? It'll do. Sorry, Rue, I sent out silently. And so we were married to dueling banjos. Rue processed into the room, arm in arm with Garrett. Both of them wore furrowed brows, unable to ask the question that must have been killing them. What the bloody hell is this music? When did this become a hillbilly wedding? And are we supposed to finish with a yee-haw? Thankfully, the volume was turned down during the ceremony. I met Rue's bewildered glance with a smile, and from there we carried on as normal. It wasn't until afterwards, as we were signing the register, that my dad said, "If I'd have known, I'd have worn my cowboy boots." I can't believe anyone would get married to that crap, I said. I mean, even if you were really, really into it, it's just not right. Maybe they weren't getting married to it, Rue suggested. But that's the whole point. They don't use this room for anything else. Unless some of the staff snuck up here for a party. Wow, I bet questions will be asked around the office tomorrow. We posed for photos on a grand staircase of polished oak, which was nowhere near the small room, and a few more outside. It really was a lovely building, and its ancient stonework lent itself perfectly to our loose medieval theme. From here we only had a short, glamorous walk past the public toilets and across a car park to reach the Castle Hotel and the garden where our guests would be gathering. I struggled a bit with my boots on the cobblestones. That's what you get for wearing heels, Rue said. And then we parted once more. Jill escorted me into the secret garden while Rue and her entourage disappeared into the trees. No more rehearsals. This was it. Magic time. It suddenly occurred to me that we hadn't arranged any cues or signals. I didn't have a clue how long it would be before Rue's party re-emerged from the foliage, and neither did they. We just have to make that bit up as we went along. Come to think of it, a rehearsal wouldn't have been a bad idea. Tying the knot. This was it. The guests were seated. The harpist was playing. I took my place before the giant chunk of tree trunk with Jill at my side and waited. Like an elven princess, Rue's arrival was preceded by the glimmer of white silk through the leaves. Sunlight dappled her path around the congregation, and I heard the rustle of people turning to look at her. I knew she'd made it to the tree opposite the altar when the harpist smoothly switched into In Dreams, a haunting instrumental from The Lord of the Rings that we'd chosen to replace that god-awful Here Comes the Bride racket. A pair of butterflies danced above Rue's head as the sisters preceded her down the aisle, with little Circe skipping along behind her, holding onto a train. Arm in arm with the dad, Rue seemed to float down the aisle, though I could only allow myself a few sneaky peeks. And then she was there beside me, smiling in delight, radiating in excitement, more beautiful than ever before. The ceremony started well enough. First, Sonia came up to read a poem, Marriage is Like the Planting of Two Trees, by Moira Stewart. Then Angela, the celebrant, spoke up, thanking our guests for coming and travelling such a long way. And now, she continued, we'll have a moment's silence for our loved ones who have passed away and can't be with us today because they're dead. Must not laugh, I told myself. Then Mum read Above You Are the Stars piece, drawn from an old Celtic hand-fasting ritual. After countless hours of internet research, debate, rechoosing, rewriting, reprinting and seeking approval, both readings were over in seconds. Each was a lovely addition to our ceremony and both were delivered exactly as I'd imagined. It was what came next that took me by surprise. After briefly explaining the significance of nature in our spiritual beliefs, Angela asked everyone to stand. From the beginning, we'd wanted pagan elements to be present in what was essentially a hand-fasting ritual, but we'd always been careful not to offend the staunch Catholics in our crowd. I thought I'd done a pretty good job of distilling the essence of this ancient ritual, but our celebrant had a surprise contribution up her sleeve. Actually, it was tucked into the belt of her robe. I hadn't spared it a second glance, assuming it was part of the costume, until she snatched it forth and thrust it skyward like a loaded wand. A maraca. Facing the assembled guests, she started shaking the thing vigorously above her head, the distinctive rattle of the beads inside it almost drowning out her words. Or maybe that was just the shock. I call to you, O spirits of the north, she chanted as she shook the maraca in time. My jaw dropped. Rouge nearly hit the floor. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, the exact thing was passing through our heads. What the hell is going on? Where did that maraca come from? I wanted to glance around to see if our reactions were being filmed for some prank-based hidden camera show, but I was frozen in place. I mean, I have nothing against maracas. I know that some cultures consider them sacred objects, but personally I'd always associated them with Spanish flamenco dancing and hippie campfire sing-along songs. Please God, don't let bongos be next. For a terrible second, I thought she was going to hand me the maraca and ask me to sing my vows. But then the rattle swinging was over. Having called out for blessings to the spirits of all four cardinal directions, she placed the instrument on the altar, and we were once again safe from the threat of a kumbaya. Rue was grinning at me and shaking her head in disbelief. I knew what she was thinking. We'd spent hours going over this ceremony in the minutest detail, rearranging passages, sentences, even words. We discussed every aspect, every standing position, every prop. The word maraca had never been mentioned. But now all that was behind us. It was time for the hand fasting. Angela took Rue's hands, placing them in mine, and began to wind the ivy-laced ribbon around our wrists. She did this slowly and solemnly, while speaking aloud the words of an incredibly poetic blessing I'd found online. These are the hands of your best friends, young and strong and full of love for you, that are holding yours on the wedding day as you promise to love each other every day, tomorrow and forever. These are the hands that will work alongside yours as together you build your future. These are the hands that will passionately love you and cherish you through the years, and with the slightest touch will comfort you like no other. These are the hands that will hold you when fear or grief fills your mind. These are the hands that will countless times wipe the tears from your eyes, tears of sorrow and tears of joy. These are the hands that will tenderly hold your children. These are the hands that will help you to hold your family as one. These are the hands that will give you strength when you need it. And lastly, these are the hands that, even when wrinkled and aged, will still be reaching for yours, still giving you the same unspoken tenderness with just a touch. I was tearing up by the time she finished, and then I realised we'd come to the point we were supposed to exchange our vows. I also realised we'd never quite got around to deciding what order we'd be doing this in. Never mind. I gave Rue a polite, ladies first, kind of nod, and she responded with an almost imperceptible shake of her head. I waited patiently for a few moments, in case she was gathering herself to speak, but her eyes were growing wider by the second. Should I go first, I wondered? I didn't want to risk talking over at a time like this. The silence stretched out, taut like a rubber band, destined to snap back on one or the other of us, and that's when I had a romantic revelation. I knew Rue so well I could read even the tiniest nuance of her body language. As I gazed at her, she developed a slight set to her jaw which said to me, if you don't open your mouth and start flapping it right now, I'm going to punch you in the nuts in front of all these people. That pretty much cleared up the confusion. So I cleared my throat and read the words I'd been struggling to memorise. Krista, since the beginning I've always felt at ease with you. It was almost like I knew you already, like we'd been together before this time. Our friendship was so effortless, so honest, and it grew into the love I've been looking for my whole life. You are still my best friend and will be forever. You are also the love of my life. You are the most important part of me. There is nothing that I do that isn't for you. I want to base my whole life around making you happy. You're so beautiful and magical. You're perfect to me. I want to spend every day with you, while we're on this earth and afterwards. I want to be with you every single moment. I will never leave your side. I love you so very, very much. Being a man, and also technically an actor, I'd like to say I stood there proud and strong and projected this heartfelt declaration to everyone in earshot. But I'm crap at acting. I'm not much better at being a man, to be honest, so I descended into sobs halfway through and ended up with tears streaming down my cheeks. It would almost have been beautiful if my nose hadn't started running too. That almost never happens when people cry in movies. Just the delicate spilling of crystal drops from their eyelashes, where in reality there's a great deal more snot involved. On the upside, having made such a mess of things gave Rue the confidence she needed. Can't possibly do worse than that, she was thinking, but in a nice way. Her smile was radiant, at once reflecting the happiness I felt, whilst also thanking me for making this so much easier for her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was trembling as she glanced down at the paper in her hand, bless her. Then slowly, softly, she began to read. Tony, you are my life, my love, and my eternal soulmate. Every day I see you and fall more in love with you, and I know the rest of my life will be perfect with you by my side. I'm the luckiest girl in the world, and I will treasure your love and companionship every second of every day. I never dreamed of someone who could match me and also share many of my hopes, dreams, and adventures. I choose you above all others every day for the rest of my life, and if you will have them, then my heart and soul will be yours forevermore. I love you. And it was perfect. Everything was perfect. As our hands were unbound, Rue and I shared a conspiratorial smile. A strip of scrap cloth, twined around with ivy that we'd stolen the night before, was carried to the altar and placed ceremoniously atop it. A huge slab of tree trunk, which had survived its journey there in the Nissan Micra's boot, had never looked more imposing. Whether or not the car had survived the journey remained to be seen. Jill stepped forward, bearing the wooden box that held our rings. £2 from a garage sale, I remembered. Not the most romantic of notions to be dwelling on at that moment, but the ridiculousness of all the individual elements was starting to amuse me. Separately, they were almost worthless, but together they became part of something far greater than all of them. There was a relationship metaphor in there somewhere. Angela was speaking. The circle is the symbol of sun and the earth and the universe. It's a symbol of holiness and perfection and of peace. This ring is a symbol of unity in which your two lives are now joined in one unbroken circle. Rue and I took our rings from Jill and placed them on each other's fingers. It was time for Angela to wrap this show up. Tony and Krista, by the binding of your hands and the exchanging of vows and rings, you have promised before all those gathered here to love one another according to your highest spiritual intentions. It is therefore my delight and privilege, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you Mr. and Mrs. SLater. It was a line that built up in a crescendo, and there was a great rustle of clothing as everyone in the crowd prepared to applaud. But no signal was given. A few uncomfortable seconds passed, where no one seemed to know what was expected of them. Applause? Hysteria? Mexican wave? I looked at Rue and then back at the celebrant. Still smiling beatifically at the gap between our heads, she made a subtle shooing gesture. Then, when neither of us moved, a slightly more emphatic one. I traded confused glances with Rue. Her brow was delicately furrowed. Did she just shoo us? It asked. I think so, I replied with a chin shrug. We stood in silence for several more seconds. It felt far more awkward than I hoped it looked, but that was a temporary situation. I had to do something. I cleared my throat again and, as gently as I could, pitched a stage whisper at Angela. Can I, kiss her yet? A look of shock passed over her face and her hands flew to her mouth. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course. You may now kiss the bride. And that was the moment I'd been waiting for. I gathered Rue into my arms and traded a kiss that skirted the bounds of decency for a public venue. And the crowd went wild. Angela recovered beautifully and was a picture of calm authority as she bestowed our final blessing. May the blessings of love be upon you. May love's peace abide in you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts, now and forevermore. A wave of relief washed over me as she finished. We'd done it! Against all the odds, we'd achieved it. Minor hiccups aside, the ceremony had gone fantastically. We were now married in the sight of gods and of the law, and all those months of planning and worry were over. All we had to do now was get through the rest of the day. And that was bound to be the easy part. We turned and waved to our guests and walked back up the aisle hand in hand, surrounded by the clapping and cheering of our friends and relatives. I rode an overwhelming high as it occurred to me at that exact moment, Every single person there was thinking happy thoughts about me. It was a strong cocktail of emotion and excitement, and it went straight to my head. I was giddy for a few steps and felt as though my spirit was about to soar out of my body and fly a victory lap around the castle. Luckily, Rue brought me down to earth with a whispered warning. "Don't step on my dress!" I looked down and saw miles of fabric beneath my feet, with hardly a safe place to stand. I was going to end up playing Twister by the aisle at this rate. But then we reached the back of the garden and the big tree that we'd aligned the altar with. Suddenly we were mobbed by guests, hands shooting in from everywhere for a shake or a pat on the back. It no longer mattered that we hadn't figured out where to go from here. Knots of people blocked our path in all directions, and by the time we'd accepted all their blessings and congratulations, the whole party was scattered all over the place. It was done. It was a triumph, and it was over. Just the rest of the day to go, I reminded myself. Still carrying on, love? Are we...
Yeah.
All right.
That's half past.
Freedom of speech. We'd organised drinks outside the Winchester, by which I mean 1 glass of champagne per guest, which Kaz had very generously included in the price of our dinner. Most of the weddings I've been to seem to have been characterised by a lot of standing around. I was desperate to avoid this, as waiting is on everyone's list of least favourite things to do. Thus, I conspired to solve the dreaded debacle of photographs. Now the bride and groom with the immediate family, now with just the men, now just the bridesmaids and Great Uncle Ted because he won't shut up about it. And let's try and get everyone at the wedding in size order from small to large, with every second person doing a handstand. Firstly, I pretty much abolished this notion of large orchestrated group shots in favour of more reportage-style photography. Secondly, I gave the guests a gorgeous natural environment so they could run around the gardens taking photos of each other against the castle walls to their heart's content. Finally, and most importantly of all, I dispatched Jill to start leading them across the castle grounds to the pub, where the bar awaited. Kaz was outside already, handing out glasses of champagne and bowls of strawberries from a silver tray. This was one of many small details which she'd pulled off brilliantly, unasked for, throughout the night. She was worth her weight in gold, that woman. It really helped make the whole thing sing. A glass of bubbly confirmed to the straggle of guests that they were in the right place, made them feel welcome, and hopefully provided a boredom-free transition from ceremony to reception. We only had to kill a few minutes while the photographer snapped Rue and I embracing against the backdrop of the castle, and then we two could traipse across to the Winchester and get our drink on. Cheers granted our arrival outside the pub, which gave me a lovely warm feeling, one I could definitely get used to. A random passerby in a flat cap leapt up onto the wall, introduced himself as a performance poet, and then improvised a couple of verses for us on the spot. He was drunk, of course, but the whole thing had the delicious tang of the truly weird. Let's face it, no wedding of mine was ever likely to be normal. I was kind of grateful for it. The ancient wooden stocks from Taunton Castle were kept in the Winchester's courtyard, so inevitably I ended up in them, struggling to reach my mouth with the champagne flute in either hand. Then, as the last few guests found their way out of the gardens, the party moved inside. Kaz had done a fantastic job on the decor. The wooden wall panels shone, harking back to a more grandiose era. The simple white tablecloths perfectly complemented the clusters of candles and foliage in the centres. We hadn't had the time or money for more elaborate decorations, but the dignified atmosphere of the 800-year-old stone building made the best of what we had. Dinner was bubbling away in the buffet area, but it was still a bit early to eat. Luckily, we'd taken that into account, and the perfect thing to plug the gap was speeches. Ugh. I hate speeches. Everyone hates speeches, especially wedding speeches. Terrifying to do and a terrifying prospect to sit through. Boredom, often to such a degree it should be banned under the Geneva Convention, is the lingering legacy of many a reception. I attended far too many weddings of a child, and sitting still interminably, listening to drunk old men ramble on about the meaning of true love was the bit I feared the most. I usually aimed to be drunk myself then, at age 10. I pretty much said that anybody who wanted to make a speech was welcome to, and that no one was going to be forced. We hadn't followed any of the common conventions like assigned seating in the hope our guests would enjoy themselves much more in a less formal ambience. There were some givens, however. I would have to give a speech at some point, and I was pretty sure Jill had been concocting something to say. Recent proximity protected me from the dreaded toast joke, but Jill was nothing if not resourceful. I was sure she had something up her baggy medieval sleeve. First up, Rue's dad Garrett made a short, touching speech in which he welcomed me to the family. He told us Frida would have been delighted to see her daughter so happily married, which brought a tear to the eyes of those of us who'd known her. Then he yielded the floor to Sonia, who had a worrying gleam in her eye. I was already bracing myself mentally for when Jill delivered her best man's speech. Traditionally, this was the opportunity to rip into the groom, pulling out all those embarrassing stories he'd rather keep under wraps and generally having as much fun as possible at his expense. Jill didn't need to do much homework. She'd known me as long as anyone could, and better than most ever should. but had become impossible to embarrass around the time I started telling everyone the gory details about my trip to Ecuador. I'd just launched a career based on retelling the stupidest things I'd ever done and said, so I didn't have much to fear. Learning to laugh at myself had been easier than expected. After all, everyone else was doing it. So although I was still a tiny bit concerned, I felt I could survive anything Jill threw at me. It never occurred to me to worry about Sonia. She opened with the usual flurry of thank yous, then mentioned that she'd known we'd been getting engaged way ahead of the event. Apparently she'd read about it. Eh? Then, to my horror, she pulled out a crumpled magazine and smoothed its creases on the table. I knew my sister had started dating him, but imagine my surprise when I saw this, a story written by Tony, entitled Love in the Pumpkin Fields. Oh, God. Oh, no. Oh, please, God, no. I'll just read you a little bit. No, anything but that. And she was lying, because she read the whole damn thing. My face glowed like a beacon. I'd written that article whilst camping in Margaret River, and to my shame, it was the first thing that I'd ever had published. It was in the cheesiest, trashiest of women's magazines, those ridiculously cheap, flimsy things you find in piles in dentist waiting rooms. They'd been offering a prize of $200 for stories of true love, and we'd been desperate for cash. Telling no one but Rue, I'd penned an awfully trite account of our courtship whilst working on a pumpkin plantation in northern Australia. I'd exaggerated a fair bit. Every emotion was overwrought and our love burned hotter than the surrounding bushfires. Seeing no other option, I'd ended the piece with me proposing to Rue, both of us still plastered in mud in the middle of a pumpkin field. Hearing it again, read aloud to me in someone else's voice, was agonising. Every cliché I'd abused, every torrid metaphor I'd pulled out, every pathetic, sappy word revealed to the entire wedding party, most of whom were in hysterics. As the final, cringe-inducing line approached, I slid down in my chair and put my hands over my eyes. Sonia grinned at me over the magazine as she delivered the coup de grace. And that's when I knew I had found my true Australian princess. Oh my God. Arg. I think she got more applause for that story than I got for kissing Rue at the end of the ceremony. All I could do as the jeers and catcalls rolled over me was to make a brief plea to the crowd. In my defence, I said, I was young and I needed the money. My whole life, I thought I'd never see that article again. I honestly thought I'd gotten away with it. The magazine has since been framed. After that, my own speech passed in a breeze. I openly admitted I'd been writing it with my teeth whilst driving to the wedding, and offered my scrawled and shredded notes as proof. They'd been in the pocket of my super tight trousers since the donning of the boots, and consequently they were now quite moist. Partly because of this, and partly because I was dying of shame inside, I kept it mercifully brief. I don't think I insulted anyone by accident, which is rare for me, and if I did, well, it was my wedding day, so they probably forgave me. Then came Jill's turn. After describing some of the ways we'd tried to kill each other throughout our childhood, she brought things bang up to date by describing how my relationship with Rue had begun. I knew they were going to get together, she explained, because they spent more and more time play fighting in the pool. Then one day, Tony went for a shower, and Rue also went for a shower, and they didn't come back for 3 hours. There were groans from the crowd. They all knew where this was headed. And I knew they were in there because I really had to pee. 3 hours, for God's sake. I held it for as long as I could, and then I went into the toilet blocks, stomping my feet and coughing as loud as I could. It was dead silent in there, apart from the occasional giggle. But sure enough, there were 2 sets of feet in the end shower stall. Thankfully, she left it there. Instead, she moved on to give me some valuable advice, based, she admitted, on her having vastly more experience of married life. 3 weeks and counting. If you want a peaceful marriage, and this goes out to all the men in the room, you just have to practice these 3 little words. Yes, my queen. Come on, say it all together. Yes, my queen, rumbled the men. Perfect. Let's try it. Honey, will you do the dishes? Yes, my queen, chorused the men. Honey, would you mind moving the couch back to where it was the first time? Yes, my queen. Honey, can you hold all my bags while I try these jeans on again? Yes, my queen. Well done. See? It's not much to ask, really. Just unquestioning obedience. And it will make her very happy, which in turn will make you very happy. Because if she's the queen, guess what that makes you? There was a split second of silence while a point hit home. The king! They all cheered. So without further ado, I'd like to raise a glass to the king and queen, Tony and Krista. And finally, to thunderous applause, it was all over. Jill's speech had been witty, concise, and had skated just close enough to the boundaries of decency to embarrass me profusely, but no one else. although Rue was still blushing from head to toe. But Sonia? How on earth had she found out? Even writing about it a couple of years later, I still get snakes in my tummy. God damn you, Sonia. Well played. Okay. Dirty Dancing. The food, now that its time had arrived, was another success. Only marginally more posh than regular pub grub, it was still a revelation to the Aussies. They have bars and restaurants over there, of course, but nothing to rival the traditional English pub. We had beef medallions, chicken breasts stuffed with brie, salmon steaks in champagne sauce, and some vegetable-based muck for the vegetarians. It was all beautifully presented, and Kaz once again exceeded her brief. We wanted plenty of food, so the guests felt well fed, and she managed to pull it off superbly. After our top table was served, everyone else queued up buffet style, going back for seconds and even thirds in some cases. The simple food was a triumph. Rather than forcing exotic dishes with names they couldn't pronounce on our guests, we'd given them what they'd most likely order themselves on a night out. My family aren't exactly connoisseurs of the finer things in life, so most of them were pleased we didn't have to spend half the dinner guessing which fork to use. Champagne kept arriving at my elbow, typically by the bottle, so I rather enjoyed that leisurely hour of stuffing myself silly. Rue was just relieved she made it this far without passing out. Over dinner, she admitted it was the first thing she'd eaten since the night before, having been too nervous for breakfast and too rushed for lunch. Weddings, eh? Who'd have them? Cutting the cake was a little different for us because of the cupcakes. They made a lovely colourful display in one corner, arranged on a many-tiered stand we'd bought on eBay. A special cake-cutting knife was one of the insignificant details that had never found its way onto our radar. Rue had the perfect alternative, though, and drew the long, hand-forged knife I'd worn in lieu of a sword. I couldn't resist the temptation to lark around, so I held a cupcake in my teeth while she sliced it in half. Both of us had been drinking by this point, as had the majority of the guests, which meant the trick was both far more dangerous and far more enthusiastically received than it would have been an hour ago. And then, as people lounged around munching their cakes, Jill told me it was time to get Rue on the dance floor. For the first time in my life, I beckoned my wife to come to me. She'd been lucky enough to score a second cupcake and made sure to take a bite out of it so no one else could steal it while she was away. Jill gave me the nod, meaning the music was queued up. I strode into the middle of the dance floor, leading Rue by one delicate hand. I stopped and turned around, and it was only then, scanning the wall of expectant faces arrayed before me, that I realised I had forgotten something after all. Every eyeball in the place was fixed on us, eagerly awaiting the start of our dance. Only we didn't have a dance. I remembered to choose the music, as every couple appreciates the significance of their song, but not until that moment had it occurred to me that every single guest at the wedding would be stood around in a circle, scrutinising our first dance from less than 3 feet away. Now, I may have mentioned that one of my defining characteristics is clumsiness. Unsurprisingly, this trait does not lend itself well to the mastery of dance. Hence the reason I'd never progressed beyond the level of big fish, little fish cardboard box. Well, I can do a rather exaggerated finger point a la Saturday Night Fever, but this didn't seem like the time to unleash that puppy. I was wearing knee-high leather riding boots with slippery leather soles, a substantial heel, and not quite enough flexibility to let me walk normally in. And Rue was wearing flip-flops. The likelihood of her spending our wedding night with a broken toe loomed large in my mind. We faced each other across the polished wooden floor, and I could see her expression mirroring the horror in mine. "Oh shit," it said. "How could we not have thought about this?" It was like that dream where you realise you're naked in front of your whole school class. Only this was real, and no amount of fancy clothes could conceal the fact that neither of us could dance if our lives depended on it. But there was nothing for it. The crowd was seething with anticipation, and we had to give them something. The music started, and the opening bars of Aerosmith's "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing" drifted out of the speakers. Rue approached nervously with a look that said, "This thing isn't going to end well." But it was too late to do anything about it, so I pulled her in and close, wrapped my arms around her, and we waggled slowly back and forth for 5.5 agonising minutes. "Is it over yet?" she whispered, her lips only centimetres from my ear. "No," I hissed. "They're still looking." "Oh crap, keep waggling." And that was what I did, until Jill had mercy on us and faded out the music halfway through the final chorus. The thunderous applause that greeted us told me 2 things: that most of my guests were already drunk, and that they too were very glad the dance was over. It must have been almost as awkward to watch as it was to experience. "Thank God that's finished," Drew said as the party music started cranking and the dance floor filled with people. "Hell yeah," I agreed. "Right, I'm going to get a drink, and I believe your next job is to dance with your dad, then my dad, then the best man, and so on. Enjoy yourself." And I legged it off the dance floor as fast as my boots would carry me. I spent the next couple of hours propping up the bar. Now that all the ceremonial stuff was open, I was finally free to chat with my guests, some of whom were friends I hadn't seen since university. I lost count of how many drinks I was bought that evening, but it was certainly more than I could have survived without a trip to the hospital. Bizarrely, I drank almost none of them. I was so excited to catch up with my friends that I hardly touched a drop, nursing one bottle of cider for so long at one point, I had 8 more drinks lined up waiting for me and had to give them away for other people to make room on the bar. Along with cider, people kept buying me champagne, only they seemed to do this in bottles, so by the time Rue came to find me, I was festooned with the things. It was a great excuse not to dance. I had champagne bottles protruding from every crevice I could stuff one into, and they still kept coming. Rue wasn't so easily deterred, however, and hauled me off to the dance floor to visit the guests that weren't crowding the bar. The Dutch contingent were having a great old time. They'd smuggled in a CD of folk music and convinced Kaz to put it on, and were stomping around in some sort of traditional clog dance. It was impossible not to join in, so infectious was their energy, and soon most of the wedding party had linked arms in a big circle and were rushing in towards each other like they were doing the hokey-cokey. I was outside taking a breather when the fight kicked off. Someone was dancing too enthusiastically with someone else's wife, and suddenly there were shouts and shrieks, and a couple of the bigger blokes tumbled out of the courtyard trading punches. But what's a wedding without at least one brawl, eh? All too soon the festivities were winding up, and it was time to think about heading back to the travel lodge. The trip was accomplished by doing 2 runs in the same minibus, thereby making the saving that had allowed Rue to arrive in such style in the limo. I was still amazed that everything had worked out so well, creating a seamless experience for the guests in spite of our modest budget. It had been a huge amount of work to make it all happen, but at the end of the night I decided it had all been worthwhile. We'd managed to have the wedding of our dreams for less money than some couples spend on the dress. Rue, bless her, had been excited as I was every time we made a saving, and none of it would have been possible without her can-do attitude. I felt so lucky to have found her. I couldn't imagine anyone else complimenting me as much as she did. Any other woman would have told me to bugger off the second I suggested buying a wedding dress on eBay. One more?
If you got time to do the bit where you break down the door, skip to the door.
Skip to the door?
Yes.
Not the... Well, then we missed me taking the boots off.
Oh, that's quite
A
funny
deep
too.
voice yelled...
Yeah, go on.
Or the door.
The door is funny too. The boots are pretty funny.
We'll do well. More booty. Rue and I were last to leave the Winchester. We'd have stayed for the night if we could, but by then most of our guests were on their way to the day's inn. There was enough booze stored there to keep the party going for the rest of the week, but it still felt like a wrench leaving our reception. It signified that the whole thing was over and that all the energy we put into dreaming and planning of this day was used up. It had been a spectacular success, but it was finished. Tomorrow will be just another day, the first one of the rest of our lives, as the saying goes. When we reached the day's inn, we let our guests check in first, as we didn't want anyone to be last. The receptionist was doing a staggeringly crap job of organising all the rooms, greeting every member of the group with confused questions, almost as though no one had told him we'd booked out half the hotel. When our turn came, I figured there wouldn't be too many problems. By now, there should be only one room left. "Double room, please," I said, putting on an encouraging smile for the bloke. His reply was less than encouraging. "I haven't got any double rooms left. There's a big wedding party in tonight, so we're all booked up." I sighed and put my arm around Rue. "Look, I know this sounds crazy, what with her standing here in a wedding dress and all, but we are also part of that wedding party." "Oh, so you're the SLater Rainin wedding group booking, are you?" I was fighting to keep my sarcasm from my voice. Yes, we are." "Okay, what name, please?" "Mr. and Mrs. SLater Rainin." SLater Rainin. He was actually checking the listings. "I don't think I've got you down for a double room." "I am 100% certain that you have, because I made the booking myself. I made it very carefully, over several weeks, and it is itemised exactly. And in case you haven't noticed, we are the bride and groom. We've only been married for 8 hours, so we really don't want to be sleeping in separate beds." "Well, I can have a look if number 4's a double, but I don't think so." He started rooting through his desk for keys. I was contemplating strangling him with his own tie, when 2 of my teenage cousins burst in looking for me. I recognised the look of panic on their faces straight away. I'd last seen them getting onto the bus, escorting their younger sister, who'd been doing what I did at weddings when I was her age, drinking everything I could lay my hands on. "Uh-oh, is she okay?" "She's not very well." Ruth stepped up to the desk. "Don't worry, I'll sort the room out. You go and make sure everything's all right." "Thanks, love." I left the world's dumbest receptionist to his blundering and followed the girls through the doors to the stairwell. "So what's up?" "The thing is, she's not actually too bad now, but she made a bit of a mess." I looked down as we climbed the stairs. There was a small puddle of vomit on every second or third step, as though she'd been struggling to contain it all the way up. And then, on reaching the landing, it had finally proved too much of her. A vast pool of spew saturated the carpet, lapping gently against the fire door. Chunks of mushroom floated on a sea of alcohol. She'd had the capsicum stuffed with wild rice from the look of things. That was a bit of a worry. My cousin was going to feel pretty rough tomorrow, but that kind of goes with the territory for the first time you get wasted. She'd either learn to love it or learn to hate it. The problem was the idiot at the desk. He was bound to go walkabout at some point, inspecting the building or checking my guests weren't getting too rowdy. If he saw this before we could get it cleaned up, there'd be a monumental bill waiting for us when we checked out. Rock stars wreck hotel rooms all the time, but I wasn't quite there yet. A 6-figure salary leaves enough leeway to smooth over this kind of issue, but my book earnings to date were a measly £120. I didn't want to start my marriage in debt to the day's in, for God's sake. Right, you go make sure she's still okay, I said to the girls. Try and get her to drink some water. They nodded, looking glum, and sped off down the corridor. Glancing around, I spied a cleaning closet. There was an old vacuum cleaner inside, but I had a feeling it would do more harm than good. There wasn't much else for sucking up the spilled stomach contents, but on the top shelf I discovered one of those industrial-sized rolls of flimsy one-ply toilet paper. This would have to be my salvation. I lugged the roll outside and tore off several handfuls, wadding them up around the edge of the vomit to stop it spreading further. Then, ripping off another few lengths, I rolled up my sleeves and got stuck in. 10 minutes later, another trio of my cousins arrived, rushing up the stairs in crisis response mode. They'd rounded the corner and froze in horror, staring at me as though they'd caught me molesting a dead donkey. "Hi guys," I said cheerfully. "Bit of a mess, I'm afraid." Sarah, leading the pack, chose her words wisely. "Tony, it's your wedding night, and you're on your hands and knees in the corridor, mopping up vomit. Are you sure you don't have anything else you should be doing?" Yeah, that's a good point. "Yes, quite. We'll take it from here." And they surrounded me, relieving me of vast amounts of soggy bog roll, and shooed me back downstairs. "Give me a shout if you need a hand," I called from the landing below. "No, we won't," came the reply. Rue was waiting for me in my friend Mark's room, where the after-party was just kicking off. I apologised for being late and explained the situation. Mark, a snowboarder friend I'd met while stranded in Meribel, summed up in the appropriate vernacular. "That is fully sick," he told me. "Did we get a room?" I asked Rue. "We did," she said. "It's opposite your mum and dad's room, I'm afraid, but it's a double. Actually, it's a disabled room. I'm not quite sure why we ended up in there, but it's got a double bed in it, so I didn't bother asking." "Ah, that sounds fine." I poured myself a drink from the crowded minibar that had been created on the TV cabinet. It held all the booze we'd brought from home, plus several bottles that people had sneaked out of the Winchester. It was a very tempting spread, as I'd somehow made it through the entire reception without getting remotely drunk. Now, at last, surrounded by my closest friends, I could relax. At least, I could once my damn boots were off. "Anyone want to give me a hand here?" Sally took charge. Partly because she'd helped me put them on, she had some idea of what to expect. "Right," she shouted above the general cacophony of drunken hilarity. "You three, hold him down." 3 of my guests obligingly pinned me to the bed, leaving only my legs and head protruding from the man pile. "Now you lot, grab that," she ordered. More hands fastened themselves around my boot than could feasibly hold on to it. Enthusiasm was trumping common sense, which is not quite unheard of where large amounts of drink are involved. "Brace yourself, Tony," said Sally. "This might get a little bit uncomfortable." I didn't have the breath to answer her, so I nodded. "Okay, now," she bawled. And with a many-throated roar, the pulling team heaved back on my boots, fingers digging in wherever they could find. "Ah!" I cried, more from surprise than pain. My pullers were doing a particularly savage job, dragging me half out from under the pile of sweaty bodies. "It won't work! It's too tight!" A deep voice at the back yelled, "We need lubricant!" And everyone dissolved into fits of laughter. At that point, it occurred to me to wonder what our neighbours thought of us. On the other side of that flimsy partition wall was a couple, or perhaps a family on holiday, innocently partaking of their night's accommodation. A call for a lubricant was the last thing they wanted to hear from next door, and I bet they could hear every word. Just as I decided to mention this, Sally reached a conclusion of her own. "We can't do it like this," she said. "We can't get the right angle." She called to the lads holding me down. "You lot, get him off and flip him over." "No, no," I yelled. "Just give up." "Oh, are we hurting you?" asked Sally. "Do you want something to bite down on?" "No, I mean..." "Right, hold him tight," she yelled. "Ow!" "Oh, don't be a baby," said Mark. "It'll only hurt for a minute." It hurt for longer than that, but the party carried on unabated. I bowed out less gracefully at around 4 a.m, because I had a wife to take care of. This was our wedding night, after all. I left the room to promises that all traces of the party would be cleared away by morning, and to the credit of my guests, they were. Personally, I blame Sally and Mark, who managed to dispose of all the remaining alcohol by themselves. I think they finally stopped drinking at around the time I was getting up again, but they were as good as their word. The room was spotless. The same was true of the rest of the hotel. You'd never know there'd been a party at the Days Inn at all. Well, except for the drying patches of vomit on the stairs. Oh, and there was one other minor detail. What do you think? Shall I try the door or? Off to a flying start. I'll be quick with this one, I promise.
No, take your time. It's all good.
On my first morning as a married man, I was faced with the same series of dilemmas most newly wedded males encounter. Chief among these was my intense desire to stay in bed with my wife, something I couldn't do on account of having guests that needed attention, and because we were going to be kicked out of our room in 10 minutes anyway. The next issue may be more familiar to the female half of most couples, in that I simply had nothing to wear. My wedding outfit was a screwed-up ball of sweat-stained shirt and skin-tight trousers. It was about the least appealing thing I could think of wearing to breakfast with my extended family. Unfortunately, I had no choice. The rest of my clothes were still where I'd left them, in the grand ballroom of the Castle Hotel in the centre of Taunton. My shoes were with them. My focus on the events of the day itself had been so complete I hadn't spared a single thought for the next day. The result of this was that I hadn't even brought a change of underwear, which didn't matter as I never wore underwear anyway. I was kind of wishing I'd brought a toothbrush though, or socks, or anything other than a skin-tight, quasi-medieval costume that I'd been partying in 5 hours ago. "What are you going to wear?" I asked Rue as she began to stir. "Good morning, husband," she yawned. "Oh, yeah, good morning, my wife." We shared a giggle at the absurdity of that notion. "We're married. How weird is that?" I know. Then as Rue reluctantly swung her legs out of bed, I broached the topic again. "Are you wearing your outfit again?" "No, of course not. I'm putting my shorts on." "Oh, you bought clothes." "Of course. What, you didn't?" "I had a lot on my mind yesterday." "I bet you're glad I brought clothes in." "Yeah, well done, love. What did you bring?" "I told you, shorts and a singlet." "No, I mean, what did you bring for me?" "Why would I bring clothes for you?" Donning my wedding day shirt chased away any vestiges of sleep. It was cold and clammy. Still moist, I thought. Yummy. That done, I eyed my boots wearily. Half an hour at least, and at least 3 assistants would be required to get them on, and I just couldn't face that twice in 24 hours. Barefoot, then? Hell, it wouldn't be my first time. Strolling across the car park in her short shorts, long blonde hair loose around her shoulders, Rue looked a bit like Daisy Duke. Holding her hand, bedraggled and shoeless, I looked more akin to a contestant on Survivor. Our wedding day crowd were choosing their breakfasts from the cafe. The day's inn had done us a great deal. For an extra £5 worth of accommodation, we'd each been given a voucher for £8 worth of breakfast. By some amazing coincidence, the cheapest thing on the menu was also £8, leading some to believe there was a cleverly orchestrated scam going on. But never mind, the food was surprisingly good, and all the more welcome after the night of dancing and drinking. No one batted an eyelid when I explained why I was barefoot. After all, these were people who knew me. There was some concern over where my parents were, though, as no one had seen them all morning. When they did show up, Dad was looking a little sheepish. I could just tell that something had happened, so I tackled him straight away. "What's wrong?" "Oh, nothing to worry about," said Mum. "Really?" "Well, you know they put us in the room opposite yours?" "Yes." "When we checked in last night, the man on the desk said he was giving us that room because we were responsible and sober." I stifled a snigger. "And?" "Sorry." "Well, he warned us there was no spare key for that room, so we had to be extra careful that we didn't get locked out of it." "And what happened?" "We got locked out of it." "What? How?" "Oh, ask your dad. He had to take the damn dog for a walk." "I thought she was in the bathroom," Dad explained. "I told her I was going out with Cassie, and only I wasn't in the bathroom, was I?" Mum chipped in. "So I shut the door, and then I met your mum in reception." "Ah. But don't worry," he finished. "They've got a bloke working on it right now." "Oh dear. I'll go and see what's happening." "No," said Mum. "No need for that. Finish your breakfast." "I'm a married man now," I reminded her. "You don't need to tell me to finish my breakfast. I've got man things to do." And I set off back through the car park. I could almost feel her shaking her head in despair. Crouched by the door to my parents' room, swearing copiously, was a short bloke in coveralls. The corridor around him was littered with tools and liberally sprinkled with wood shavings. "You all right, mate?" I asked him. "Just trying to drill the lock," he said, pausing to wipe the sweat off his forehead with a rag. "But she won't budge." He'd pulled away the faceplate and from the locking mechanism and removed the door handle, but all that I'd left him with was the barrel of the lock firmly embedded in the door. "The security bolts, you see, with a metal plate on the other side. It might have been easier to pick, but..." He waved a hand to indicate the ruined keyhole chewed up with his power drill. "Don't know what I'm going to do, to be honest. Think I'll have to call the boss." He didn't sound too thrilled about that. I instantly knew this was my moment. Being married was already doing all kinds of worrying things to my confidence. "Stand back," I told the bloke. "I'm going to kick it in." "Hey? You're welcome to try, but there's not much room." "Don't worry, I'm staying in the room opposite." I produced my keys and opened the door to my room. I don't know if it filled him with confidence or not to realise I was related to the idiots who caused this problem in the first place. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. Hell yeah, I wanted to say. But I was afraid that might make me sound a little unhinged. I mean, who doesn't want to try kicking a door down given the chance? A security door. With permission? Yeah, I'll give it a go, I said, struggling to keep the excitement from my voice. The bloke scraped his pile of tools out of the way as I retreated a few steps into my room. Don't hurt yourself, he warned. I won't, I promised. He glanced down at my feet. Are you going to put some shoes on first? Nope. And then it was time. I advanced a step, sprang forward another, and unleashed a front kick that was aimed 10 inches beyond the door. My foot slammed into the polished wood with even more enthusiasm than I'd expected, and with a mighty crack, the door burst inwards. A split second later, there was a clang from the far side of the room as the steel reinforcing plate shot across it and bounced off the opposite wall. Broken lock components tinkled to the floor as the door quivered in its frame. Fucking hell! Well done, lad, said the maintenance man. No worries, I told him. Not my first time. Ah. So you okay with this? I asked. Oh yeah, I'll sort it out. Thanks for your help, though. Any time. And I strode off down the corridor and waited until I was out of sight around the corner before I stopped to look at my foot. It looked normal, which didn't explain why my whole leg felt it was about to drop off at the hip, but I guess that was to be expected. Slowly, the wave of pain subsided, and I dared to put my weight on the offending foot again. It hurt like hell, but I could walk. Kind of. As I limped back to the cafe, my parents were just finishing their breakfast. Did you help him to get it open? Dad asked. Oh yeah, smashed it. That's great. How did you do it? With a drill? No, I slapped my leg, eliciting a wave of pain from my joint. I actually smashed it. Oh? Yeah, you might be getting a bill. And yeah, we'll leave it down there. It's a good place to end that chapter without going on too long. So
why did they give your parents the key? You own in a room with one key. Responsible adults.
They hadn't even told me. You know, like I was arguably more of a responsible adult at that point because I hadn't actually had anything to drink hardly. But it's just one of those things. I like my dad thought Mum was in the bathroom and just walked out, shouted at her on the way out, just going to take the dog for a walk, and out he went, and then got to reception and there she was. Anybody, it could happen to anybody. It's just the fact that it was specifically told. But it worked out really well because I got to, the morning after my wedding, I got to kick in a door, and I think it was the first time I'd actually properly, honest to God, kicked down a locked door,
Superhero.
just like they do in the movies, and it was awesome. But I did break my foot in the process, so it felt amazing until about 30 seconds after. Anyway, guys, right, thank you so much for staying with me and watching. You're all done. No more waffle from me. Next week, as I said, we'll get into Shave My Spider, so loads of good stuff in that one, and we'll just carry on until we get bored of that.
Someone asked if you lost your wedding ring.
Oh no! I just never wear my wedding ring because let's face it, I would have ruined it or lost it.
Yeah.
So I take it off every so often, about once every 6 months. I take it off to go to the gym and forget for about 6 months to put it back on again, which is what is now on Rue's bedside table, which just goes to show that I should never ever have it on, because every time I do take it off for doing press-ups or gardening or bloody anything, I just put it in the first place that I see and then forget I ever even had it. So it would guaranteed have been lost, and there's been so many times where I've just suddenly just gone like, shit, where's my wedding ring? And Rue normally just points straight to it because she normally has found wherever I've put it down and taken it. So these days I actually don't wear it.
I keep it safe for you.
So yeah, Rue's she wears hers. Yeah. She's safe with rings. She doesn't do things. She doesn't spontaneously do like handstands in the middle of shopping centres just because they can, and climb every tree they walk past and things like that. So I'm hard on clothes and shoes and everything. Cups and breakable things. So thank you ever so much, guys. If you do have any favourite bits of Shave My Spider, chuck a link in. Send me a message or something, or chuck a link in the comments or something, and I'll try and address that in the next session. Awesome. And until then, thank you very much, and we shall see you next week. Look after yourselves, guys, and have a fun week.